I am very happy to be here today, and I am going to talk, as Danica already said, about transitioning from interviewer-administered to self-administered mode designs, especially in repeated cross-sectional surveys. This is the survey guide that I am currently working on. It is not published yet. It has been reviewed, but it's in the publishing process. So this is giving you a sneak preview of what is going to come, and you will definitely get a heads up if you watch our channels on Instagram or Blue Sky and everything else. If you follow Gesis, you will get a heads up once it's published. My name is Eileen Heller. Danica already said I organized the Meet the Expert series with her together. But in the meantime, I am a researcher and consultant in the department Survey Design and Methodology here at GESIS in a team questionnaire design and evaluation. My research interests include a methodological focus on comparability of survey data, especially on ways of assessing and assuring measurement invariance. But I also have a substantive interest in the field of social psychology, mainly in the areas authoritarianism, right-wing extremism, and anti-Semitism. If you want to contact me, there is my email address on the slides, and feel free to reach out. Um, this talk I have already mentioned is supposed to offer some advice on choosing the right survey mode or mode combination in the process of switching from interviewer-administered to self-administered modes. And today I am going to be pointing to advantages and pitfalls of different mode scenarios. But first off, where are we at right now? Most of you will know that IAM's interviewer-administered modes have been the gold standard for quite a while when it comes to representative surveys, especially the face-to-face mode that I will mainly be referring to. This mode has been, like other modes, facing major difficulties in recent years. It includes declining response rates coupled with rising refusal and non-contact rates, but also difficulties when it comes to interviewer recruitment, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic that was coupled with the retirement wave of very experienced interviewers. Overall, and this is important, especially for the interviewer-administered mode, is we see increased fieldwork efforts. We have to go back to people with multiple contact attempts. This takes a lot of time. Scheduling becomes uncertain, and it becomes more costly to actually go through with these. With these surveys. In fact, there's a study by Wolf et al. From 2021 that found that survey costs between 2002 and 2018 have increased by over 200% when the consumer price inflation was only at 125%. So that gives you a rough idea what we're talking about here. And even though the most large-scale survey programs have increased their efforts for field work, the downward trend in participation has not come to a halt. This was the reason why a lot of international large-scale programs, like, for example, the European Value Survey or the Generation Gender Survey, are more and more allowing participating countries either to experiment with or to actually implement SAM's self-administered survey designs in order to ensure data quality, but at a reasonable price. So to understand the challenges and opportunities of mode transitions, it makes sense to at least briefly talk about mode effects in the context of the total survey error framework. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this framework, so I just want to briefly outline why it is important in this context specifically. One of the main challenges of mode transitionings is to ensure the comparability over time. That is basically my topic in here, meaning that we have to watch and see that data is comparable before and after the mode switch. This may be a challenge as the mode effects may differ regarding their errors of representation and errors of measurement that they're associated with. This is to say that during a mode transitioning, the data quality, for example, the sample composition, might actually improve. And yet this would also threaten the comparability, as any changes that we observe in data quality need to be assessed and mitigated. But let's turn to the TSE first. So errors of representation basically address the problems of participant selection and sample composition. That includes errors in coverage, in sampling, and in unit non-response. When we look at mixed mode designs, there's also the problem of self-selection, so people can decide which mode they select into. That is not a problem, of course, in single mode designs. It is obvious that there are certain factors associated with errors of representation that go beyond, let's say, the mere choice of mode in the data collection phase. So on top of the data collection phase, of course, it is important what mode we choose for initial contact, which choices we give regarding modes in mixed mode settings, in which order mode choices are presented, and what type of incentive is being offered and when. All of these are relevant factors when it comes to mode choices, but they're not the main focus of this talk. We are also, on the other hand, interested in errors of measurement. Those focus on the immediate response given by the participant, and they're thus associated with the validity of a construct, with the instrument that is used to assess that construct, and with the actual response that is given by the participant. Most of you have probably heard the name Turin Zhou. He has differentiated the response process and broken it down into several parts: question comprehension, retrieval of information, judgment, and response selection. And actually, when we look at survey mode can influence all stages of that process. For example, it can influence the difficulty perception as well as motivational components that may lead to increasing or decreasing tendency of optimizing and satisficing behaviors. Also, and this is important in the context of IAMs, social desirability may differ due to the absence or presence of an interviewer. To make things even more complex, these two types of errors, measurement and representation, they can be linked. For example, a well-trained interviewer can motivate reluctant respondents to participate at all, thus raising response rates and reducing non-response bias. And that would be on the representation side of the total survey error framework. But they could also influence the participants' response behavior, and like, for example, through social desirability, thus tapping into the errors of measurement side of the TSE. For assessment and for mitigation of mode effects, we need to try and separate these types of effects as good as possible. We can do this by addressing mode effects at two different stages in the surveying progress. First, we want to address whatever we can before we even collect the data. We talk about ex ante harmonization here. A lot of errors we can mitigate through clever design choices. For example, the benefits of mixed mode designs in addressing different groups of a population can be leveraged to improve sample composition and thus reduce non-response errors. Of course, again, this makes it necessary to also address errors ex post after the data is being collected. I said before, and I'm going to say this a couple more times, that both deterioration and improvement of data quality impacts comparability. Thus, it is central that we assess data quality no matter what. Even if we retain the same mode, we still have to assess quality over time in order to mitigate errors and harmonize data across time and across survey modes. There are several ways to assess and mitigate both errors of representation and errors of measurement, and that's what I'm going to present to you next. When it comes to ex ante design choices and reducing errors of representation, we have to consider all the additional factors that I mentioned before. What mode of initial contact, which mode choice sequence in mixed mode designs, and which incentive strategy will help us to improve our data quality the most. In mixed mode designs, we can also think about targeting and tailored designs by combining certain mode choices in different groups. For example, we could offer paper-based SAMs to older people, or even interviewer-administered modes to older people, as they tend to be more prone to these kinds of modes compared to younger people. In international surveys, we also have to consider the issue of standardization versus local adaptation of survey operations and of sampling procedures. As some modes, they may not work the same across all countries due to differences, for example, in internet coverage or even in the sampling frames that are available. These differences should definitely be investigated beforehand and carefully weighted out. Regarding errors of measurement, we can consider the questionnaire design beforehand. Some survey programs tend to reduce questionnaire length and complexity in order to also reduce cognitive burden. The evidence regarding that and errors of measurement is mixed. But what definitely needs to be adjusted is the layout, as some filters and media may or may not work in certain modes. One common approach is to start with the most restrictive mode and then simplify the questionnaire to fit that mode, and then just move this simplified version over to the other modes. Bear in mind that the socio-demographic variables may be a particular challenge when it comes to mode-specific adjustments, and those need to be addressed beforehand as well. Then there are several ways to assess data quality after the data collection phase, and some ways to mitigate those errors ex post. I'm not going to go into detail here, but just to name a few. Regarding errors of representations, one common indicator is just using response rates as a proxy for systematic unit non-response. You can also calculate those indicators for certain groups that are known to be especially underrepresented to get an idea what errors of representation may look like. Then there's the option of using external benchmark criteria, meaning using variables of which we know the true and actual population distribution. Usually we're using certain socio-demographic variables for this. There's also the option to use other auxiliary variables like paradata from the fieldwork process or internal criteria. More advanced indicators are multivariate non-response bias indicators like the R indicator. If you are interested in this, there's a whole another survey guide that you can find on our website that deals with this issue separately. So I'm gonna invite you to look into the other survey guides and dig deeper into this topic. Ways to mitigate these errors include adjustment weights and propensity score-based approaches. Turning to the errors of measurement, an analysis of response biases like midpoint or extreme point responding is advisable. There's actually several tools out there that you can use to do this. For example, the Reskin package in the Codex toolbox. Our last session here at the Meet the Expert series was on the Codex toolbox, and then there's actually a talk on the Reskin package. So if you want to find out how to use that R package, you can go back and look at that. And when available, you can also use response times as an indicator for careless responding. It is also advisable to compute indices of reliability and perform analysis of measurement invariance whenever possible. These analyses can also be used to mitigate errors to an extent, and also depending on the type of instrument that we're dealing with. Like if we're looking at a multi-item construct or a single item construct, if we want to check one background variable or multiple background variables, there's different ways, and you can find that on the slide if you're more interested in that. We are actually currently working, a colleague and I, Ranjit Singh, on what we call a harmonization wizard. That will be a tool that will help users find the right harmonization strategy depending on those variables, like whether I'm looking at multi-item or single-item scales and what type of measurement I am interested in. So keep an eye out for that if you're looking to harmonize data from different modes. So finally, I do want to run through a couple of scenarios and their respective advantages and disadvantages to kind of caution you when it comes to mode transitions. And on the slide, you see the four scenarios that I will briefly address. The first one being remaining in a fully face-to-face IAM. Then I will present two single mode designs, one web-based and one paper-based, and then finally a mixed mode design with a choice of either paper or web-based participation. The advantage remaining in the established face-to-face mode, of course, is that we already have the modes of contact and all the procedures at hand, and we don't have to think about those. We can use our established contact routes. Also, among the advantages is the direct contact between the interviewer and respondent, as it allows for the use of supporting material, a higher complexity of the questionnaire. It also allows for verbal and nonverbal feedback, which might help motivational aspects. And a well-trained interview can also help avoid distractions during the interviewing process. This is also one of the disadvantages, and I've already addressed this, that compared to other survey modes, the interviewer-administered mode is not very flexible when it comes to timing and location of the respondents. Also, I addressed the rising costs and the rising fieldwork efforts. Interviewer recruitment is becoming difficult and training is costly. And other interviewer effects can pose a threat to data quality, especially when it comes to social desirability. So finally, and once again, the assessment of data quality is needed to ensure comparability over time, even if we retain the same mode. If we do switch, one option is a single mode web-based SAM. This is by far the least costly and also the fastest way of data acquisition. Processes can be automated and documented more easily. And also, it is nice that we can implement different language options rather easily. Another advantage for the respondent is that they have a lot of flexibility regarding the timing and location of a response, but this can also be seen as a disadvantage as there's little to no control over the survey situation. Compared to IAMs, the web-based SIMs are less intrusive and thus less prone to social desirability, while at the same time still showing high flexibility regarding media use and filters and routing techniques. Among the disadvantages are the increased efforts of ex-ante harmonization, so we do have to think about our procedures and we do have to think about adjusting our questionnaires. The lack of control over the survey situation, the lack of interviewer support, but also the need for ex post assessment of errors and possibly for harmonization across time and survey modes. Another disadvantage of the web-based SAM is that response rates tend to be especially low in the survey mode, and there are still large differences between countries and social groups. And as we're seeing today, technical difficulties might also be a problem in this mode. Another option is thus a single mode paper-based SAM that is usually still less costly than IAM, but it is also associated with more fieldwork effort compared to the web-based SAM. Regarding turnover times, it can also be located between IAM and web-based SAM, with the advantage of possibly reaching those without internet access. Flexibility regarding the timing and location of responses, as well as the intrusiveness, can be considered somewhat similar to the web-based SAM. When it comes to disadvantages, it is also similar to the web-based SAM. We have increased efforts of ex ante and ex post harmonization, and all the changes that are associated with the absence of an interviewer also apply. Compared to the web-based SAM, language options are harder to implement in the paper-based SAM, and the usage of media filters and routing techniques, as well as the collection of paradata, is very limited. If the decision is made for a mode transition, mixed mode designs are currently the most commonly used options, mainly because clever design choices can help reduce cost, while possibly even increasing coverage and improving sampling composition if mode choice preferences are met. Mixed mode designs are generally associated with less field work effort and time compared to IAMs, but more compared to just using a single mode, of course. Finally, previous research suggests few differences in measurement between the chosen SAM modes if they're all self-administered. That is, of course, partially due to the fact that the disadvantages of paper-based and web-based SAM are largely similar, and many, if not most, of the measurement effects are connected to the absence of the interviewer. Also bear in mind that increased efforts of ex ante and ex post harmonization still apply, of course, because we are changing the mode. We have to think about our procedures and our questionnaire. Just some additional considerations to think about. I already mentioned many factors influence the success of mode transitions. For example, the availability of a certain sampling frame, the mode of initial contact, the chosen incentive strategy, using pre-notifications and reminders, what type of choice sequence is presented in mixed mode designs. All of that may influence coverage, unit non-response, and the resulting sampling composition. I also mentioned that in international surveys, we have to think about balancing standardization and local adaptations in survey mode and procedures, as the same design may not yield the same high quality data in all countries, for example, due to the differences in internet access or in survey culture or other country-specific factors. So the best way, and I kind of want to conclude with that, to isolate mode effects is what we call a parallel run, with separate subsamples being administered of both the established and the envisaged new mode design. We actually had such a parallel run in the Albus in 2023, and it can be very useful to isolate mode effects because all the time-related exogenous influences apply to both subsamples similarly. This means that we can directly compare the response distribution for each variable between and SAM. Also, due to the random assignment to the two subsamples, we would expect the same distribution of variables in both modes. Any deviations in distributions then quantify basically the joint effect of different errors of representation and different errors of measurement between IAM and SAM. If errors of representation have been found to be comparable or sufficiently mitigated with the approaches that I described, we can even isolate different errors of measurement and mitigate them using the ex post harmonization strategies that I mentioned earlier. Moreover, the random assignment to either the old or new mode, basically, This random assignment facilitates causal inferences on mode effects, and we can use the data of the parallel run to establish kind of a baseline for harmonization in the future because we can quantify the differences between modes and then apply them in the waves to come. While a full parallel run will yield, so to say, the best of two worlds regarding representation and coverage, it is of course also associated with the highest cost and highest overall fieldwork efforts. Bear in mind, though, that the idea is actually that a parallel run is only implemented once and thus helps establish a baseline for the future by directly comparing the modes and isolating mode-specific effects. So to sum things up, first off, monitoring data quality and comparability is a must, whether we stick with the established mode or whether we decide to transition to a different mode. And I think I've stressed this a couple of times in the last couple of minutes. Secondly, if we do decide to go for a mode switch, this has to be planned early in order to maximize and test our ex-ante harmonization strategies. Thirdly, experimentation is key, whether it is through a pilot studies, split designs, or even a full-fledged parallel run like I just outlined on the last slide. And finally, we can make use of ex post harmonization strategies whenever necessary to ensure comparability over time. So this is actually all from me, and I am hoping you can still hear me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and your questions. Thank you.